The road trip planned by Jessen and his family was to be a quiet break, an escape after a long period of intense work. But this trip, which began as a simple trip to celebrate the success of his daughter Brianna, would turn into an unforgettable adventure, marked by a discovery that would turn their entire world upside down, calling into question much more than their concept of justice and reality itself. It all started so ordinary, almost banal. Jessen, a devoted father, was on leave after a grueling stint working for the government, where his days were mixed with secret files and overwhelming responsibilities. The ride, a simple road trip from the city of Austin, Texas, to Santa Fe, New Mexico, was meant to be a celebration of her daughter Brianna's acceptance to Stanford University, a pivotal milestone for her and for their family, who carried the hopes and dreams of generations. The family SUV was filled with the laughter of Alex and Brianna, their teenage children who were eager to enjoy this vacation. They exchanged jokes, told anecdotes from their daily lives, and rejoiced in the freedom that this road trip offered them. Natalie, the attentive mother, chose the music, bringing a touch of lightness and conviviality to the trip, singing at the top of her lungs with her children when a song she loved came on the radio. Jessen was more reserved, preferring to observe the passing landscape. But he felt soothed by the prospect of spending time with family, away from the obligations and pressures of his job. Each landscape that passed through the vehicle's windows, with its rich colors and vastness, seemed to belong to another world, a peaceful world, far from everyday concerns. The great Texas plains, the majestic mountains of New Mexico, the deep blue of the sky stretching as far as the eye can see. The road, although unpredictable, offered a feeling of complete freedom, and it seemed that nothing could break this harmony. Yet even in this relaxed atmosphere, something invisible hung in the air, like a gentle but persistent tension. Jessen had the impression that this tranquility was only a fragile illusion. After all, he was no ordinary man. His work, his responsibilities, his commitments in a complex world required him to remain vigilant, to keep an eye on every detail. He knew that, although this trip might seem like a well-deserved break, he would never escape this role of protector, of guardian, even outside of a professional setting. He had felt it from the start, a sensation like a presentiment that would not leave him, an intuition that life was going to lead them to something greater than this simple escapade. But suddenly, everything changed. A bright light in the rearview mirror and sirens pierced the quiet of the road. A police car appeared behind them, and the previously relaxed atmosphere instantly cracked. Jessen, at first surprised, quickly calmed down. He parked the vehicle on the shoulder, following the procedure to the letter. His hands shook slightly, but he placed them firmly on the steering wheel, adopting a posture of apparent calm. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. Brianna, sitting in the passenger seat, gave Jessen a worried look, seeking reassurance that he struggled to offer. In the back, Alex, headphones still around his neck, observed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The agent who approached seemed ordinary, with his impeccable uniform and professional demeanor. Yet something in his demeanor gave off an intimidating coldness. His eyes, sharp and impassive, quickly scanned the vehicle before stopping on Brianna and Alex. As soon as he opened his mouth, the uneasiness became palpable. "You seem out of place here," he said in a condescending tone, his gaze hardening. Jessen, immediately sensing the dangerousness of the remark, took a deep breath to keep himself calm. He replied politely, trying to defuse the situation. "We just came back from a family dinner. Is there a problem, officer?" But the question was ignored. The officer continued to stare at the car, his closed face betraying thinly veiled contempt. Brianna looked away, feeling a wave of anger rising within her, but she forced herself to remain impassive. She knew that the slightest reaction could be interpreted as insubordination. The tension rose further when a second police officer approached, his expression even more rigid. The two officers exchanged a few words in hushed tones before asking Jessen to get out of the vehicle. Brianna opened her mouth to protest, but a look from Jessen dissuaded her. He walked out slowly, his hands still in full view, and stood in front of the car. The police then began to search the vehicle, opening the glove compartment, spilling the contents of the handbags and suitcases without any consideration. "But what are you looking for?" Brianna asked, her voice betraying suppressed anger. One of the agents replied sharply, "Don't get involved, madam. This is standard procedure." Alex, who until then had remained silent, felt his own indignation rise. He took out his phone and started filming, his heart pounding. When the younger officer violently grabbed Alex's phone and smashed it on the ground, the effect was immediate. The sharp sound of the device shattering against the asphalt sounded like a clap of thunder, marking an invisible boundary between built-up tension and an imminent breaking point. Alex gaped at the scattered pieces of his phone, his hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Brianna stifled a cry, instinctively placing a protective hand on her son, while Jessen, who had until now managed to contain his emotions, felt a wave of frustration and rage wash over him. But Jessen knew that giving in to anger would only make the situation worse. It was no longer just about control or authority. He understood that what they were facing was more than a simple abuse of power. It was a brutal demonstration aimed at reminding them of their supposed inferiority, an attempt to demean them, to crush them under the weight of a biased and unjust system. The youngest policeman, visibly proud of his action, stood up arrogantly and gave Alex a provocative look. The other, older officer approached Jessen, looking menacing. "Get out of the vehicle," he ordered sharply, his tone betraying a desire for domination. "You are under arrest." "For what reason?" Jessen asked, his voice calm but firm, implicitly challenging the officer to justify this nonsense. "Obstruction of a police check," the man replied brusquely, his words tinged with blatant bad faith. Brianna, unable to remain silent, intervened. "It's ridiculous. You exceed all limits." The officer gave him a cold look before turning back to Jessen, pointing at the door. "Now, or I'll handcuff you right here." It was the last straw. Jessen, although in control of himself, felt anger boiling within him. But rather than losing his temper, he opted for a more impactful strategy. He slowly turned towards his family, placing a reassuring hand on Brianna's and giving Alex a soothing look. With a measured gesture, he plunged his hand into the inside pocket of his jacket. The police officers, suddenly nervous, instinctively placed a hand on their holsters, ready to draw. "No sudden movements," the younger officer warned, his voice trembling slightly. Ignoring the warning, Jessen took out a black wallet and opened it with deliberate slowness. The summer sun, high in the sky, made the golden emblem he took out sparkle. A badge, stamped with letters engraved in relief, CIA. The silence that followed was almost unreal, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The police officers, until then self-confident and arrogant, instantly froze. The older officer's face lost all color, while his colleague, wide-eyed, wavered slightly as if the ground had slipped beneath his feet. "Are you from the CIA?" the older officer stammered, his hesitant voice betraying growing fear. Jessen, without showing the slightest emotion, simply replied in a cold voice, "Correct." This word, simple but loaded with weight, rang like a bell, breaking the tense silence and marking a radical transformation in the dynamics of the situation. The police, once so sure of their authority and domination, instinctively backed away, as if the invisible force of the word had disarmed them. Their faces, previously marked by arrogance, fell apart, giving way to a palpable fear, a dread that penetrated them to the depths of their being. Jessen hadn't just reversed roles. He had confronted them with a truth they were not ready to face: their abuse of power, their blind prejudice, and their inability to recognize the dignity of the people they were trying to oppress. This was no longer a simple traffic stop incident. It had become a merciless mirror, reflecting the systemic injustices that plagued society. Jessen's gesture, although simple, taking out a badge, a symbol of authority that the police could not deny, carried a weight far beyond his physical form. This badge had not only restored balance, he had exposed the hypocrisy of those who saw themselves as the sole holders of power. For Jessen's family, this moment marked a turning point. What had started as a light and festive road trip, a simple getaway to celebrate Alex's success at university, had transformed into a confrontation with the workings of a biased system. This simple family trip, with its laughter and music, had been interrupted by a brutal demonstration of what it meant to be seen differently in your own country. Brianna, sitting in the back seat with Alex, felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She looked at Jessen, her husband, with a mixture of pride and sadness. This man whom she knew for his patience and his integrity had just reminded these police officers that they could not afford everything, that there were limits, even in their arrogance. But at the same time, she couldn't help but think, why did you always have to prove your worth, always defend yourself, just to exist? Alex, for his part, seemed transformed. The carefree student that he was that very morning had given way to a young man aware of the realities of the world in which he lived. The shock of seeing his father confront injustice with such mastery had awakened a deep awareness in him. "Dad," he finally whispered, breaking the silence in the car. "Why do we always have to prove who we are?" Jessen, his hands firmly placed on the steering wheel, remained silent for a few seconds before responding, his voice imbued with serene gravity. "Because some want to make us forget who we are," he replied softly. "But they should never be given this power." The road trip, which was supposed to be a moment of lightness, of freedom, had transformed into a symbol of resistance. This badge, sparkling in the sun, had become much more than a CIA badge. He now embodied a fight for justice, for integrity, and against the systemic injustices that persisted. On this road that stretched before them, once synonymous with discovery and picturesque landscapes, Jessen and his family now drove with a silent mission, never to lower their heads. This experience had reminded them that, even in quiet moments, the fight for truth and dignity continued. As the car drove away from the scene, leaving the officers behind, still frozen in their fear, Jessen took one last look in the rear-view mirror. "It's not just for us," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's for everyone who hasn't been so lucky." The road ahead of them was no longer just a path. It had become a metaphor for the fight to build a better future. For Alex, for Brianna, and for everyone who would come after them.